Hello everyone. In this video we will show you how to call API in Informatica. Specifically, we will focus on how to post data to API server using Informatica PowerCenter. API refers to any type of API, which could be XML web service, it could be JSON API or some other format API. Regardless, our idea is to read something from source, create a JSON or XML and send to API server via post request. So let me show you our basic setup before we begin. So we have here is source data. These are the three sample customer records. We want to create JSON out of this and send to REST API using post request. Okay, so let's get back to mapping designer. This is the sample mapping where we have a source which can be anything like a relational table from SQL Server or Oracle. It could be file, it could be Excel. So we take this data and then we actually create a formatted data output. So this may be optional step, but sometimes you have to format dates, numbers as per the API specification. Here we are passing our date as YYMMDD format. Once you have the formatted data, you can pass to SQL Transform. This is where everything happens. In SQL Transform, we are taking input data and passing it into our SQL query. Now this SQL query may look like a little bit different than traditional database query. Here we have with clause, we have some attributes like source, URL, body and something like a meta. Anyway, this query is specific to ZappySys ODBC Driver for API. Okay, so we will cover everything in depth in a few seconds. Okay, so let me run this workflow. And while we're doing this, I'm going to start this tool called Fiddler. It's a very popular tool to debug web API requests. As you see, we got 3 requests already once our workflow is done. Okay, if you have not downloaded this tool, we highly recommend download this tool called Fiddler. After you download and install, make sure you enable HTTPS option to decrypt HTTPS traffic. Now let's look at each request in depth. So as I told you, we had 3 different records in flat file format, but after we post, as you see, we converted them into JSON body. Okay. It's a post request and here is our URL. Each URL has some parameter which we made it dynamic using our SQL query. Okay, and at the bottom pane you see we have a response. It's also in JSON format. Out of this response, we only wanted these 2 attributes. That's why we formatted our SQL query like this. As you see, we only extracted these 2 values from the SQL response, and we are actually passing these 2 values to some target file. Okay, so anyway, let's get started. In the next section, we will show you how to make this happen step by step. Thank you. Welcome back. So in our previous section, we talked briefly about how to post JSON data to your web service using ZappySys ODBC PowerPack. Now we will see those steps in depth. So let's get started. Very first thing you have to do is download ZappySys Driver. ZappySys provides two different products, ODBC PowerPack and SSIS PowerPack. For this purpose, you might want to consider ODBC PowerPack. ODBC PowerPack comes with many drivers such as JSON file and REST API driver, XML files and SOAP API driver, CSV file and REST API driver, and there are many more like Amazon S3, Azure Blob, SFTP. Those drivers can be used according to your scenarios. So whatever we're going to discuss today is specifically for JSON file format and REST API, which returns your data in JSON format. But this concept can be applied to XML or SOAP API. Okay, so assuming you downloaded free 30 days trial and installed it, after that you can go to your start menu and search for ODBC. Here you will see two different type of ODBC administrator programs. This is part of your OS. For this demo we need 64-bit. 64-bit process access 64-bit system DSN and 32-bit process access 32-bit system DSN. If the process is executing under your account, then you might want to add under user DSN. But most of the Informatica processes, they usually run using system account. That's why we need to use system DSN. Now for this purpose, my Informatica server is running on the same box where my designer is installed, but you may not have that way. If your designer is on your workstation and Informatica server is on the remote machine, you have to install ODBC PowerPack on both machines. Same installer can be used for this purpose. Alright, so for these, let's choose system DSN, click add. Now once you see the list of drivers, you want to scroll down and select ZappySys JSON Driver. Click finish. And here, first thing, you might want to add meaningful name. So I'm calling you ZappySys Demo 2. Then you can type your file name or URL from where you want to consume your JSON. This is my sample API endpoint where we're going to post data. Now if you have credentials, you can use HTTP and use any of these type of credentials options. You can put your user ID and password. If you're not sure what type of credential method you have to use, then refer to your API. If it talks about two-step authentication, like extract your token first by calling login endpoint or token endpoint, and then pass that extracted token to second request, then you might want to consider these authentication method. If you go to here, we have also help file link. You can click learn more to read step-by-step instruction. But for this purpose, we do not have any credential, so I'm just gonna skip it. Some API also refer to OAuth. It may be client credential grant or password grant. If you see anywhere it says OAuth, you might want to consider these options. Alrighty, for now let's just keep default. Now this endpoint requires us to submit data using post method. These are some common verbs, HTTP request methods you can use. If you're sending data through request body, then you might want to use post method, or it can be put method. So just refer to your API documentation. If you want to read data, or you passing parameters using just URL or HTTP headers like that, then you might want to consider get method. Okay, so for this demo, let's just assume we are sending data into JSON format. Like this. This is my sample JSON I want to submit to server. then you might want to send proper content type to server. Okay, in this case I'm selecting application/JSON. Sometimes you have to submit some headers like this, then just supply that. This may be totally optional, you just refer your API documentation. Alrighty, and that's pretty much it. Now if you go to preview tab, you may notice our default query has been generated. I mean, I can run it and it will work totally fine. I can also use test connection option at the bottom to make sure things are okay. Now thing is, if you leave this default, it will use everything from this user interface we supply values. But here is the beauty, you can always override those values using direct SQL query. For example, I might override my URL only and leave everything as default, or I might override my body. Okay, so let's see, we can say test2 and run it. So as you see, it's sending my body like this. Now we're going to use this tool called Fiddler to check our request. As we mentioned before, you can download this for free and it's absolutely awesome tool to debug your web API request. You may not be able to install this on webs and on your PowerCenter server, but if you have option to install, this will be very beneficial. Okay, and assuming you have enabled this, we can debug our request. Now let me run this one more time and see what happens. There you go. Okay, so this is my request and this is my response. Out of this response, we're going to extract only few pieces. Okay, so one thing you have to do, whatever information you want to extract, generate your SQL query with specific fields. For that, we have this drop down, table drop down. Okay, so I did that, and I'm going to delete unwanted fields. I don't care. And here I'm going to use my with clause to form my query. Okay, beautiful. So now once we know which fields we really need, we can save this metadata to a file or maybe internal storage. I like saving on this way. Let's see. So this is my location where I'm going to save metadata. Now why we have to do this, let me explain you. If you don't do this, ZappySys driver has to send query 2 times at least. First, it will send this and extract the metadata to determine your data types based on the response we receive in JSON, right? Because basically virtually there is no data type information comes back from response. So based on this response, it will figure out how long it needs to be for these field, right? And it try to guess this data type, and once it is formed, it actually sends same request again to get actual data. So this is fine if you're doing get request because you're not modifying any data, but if you actually doing post request, then this will create 2 records on the other side, which we really don't want. So we are actually generating data beforehand, this metadata beforehand, and we're going to use something called meta clause, meta equal to. Right? This way it has to send request only once when we run our workflow. Okay, all right, so assuming everything good, things going green, you can save this. Okay, now let's go back to our designer. First thing we will actually define source, target. Okay, for our purpose, source is flat file which we already imported using source menu, import from file. If you are actually reading from a JSON or REST API using ZappySys Driver, then you have to import using database, and then you can select your user DSN. System DSN won't be listed here, so make sure you define user DSN with the same name. Okay, so we define our source, which is flat file. We define our target, which is also flat file, and then we have to actually create our connection. Now for connection, I am going on the workflow designer and select relational option. Here we can create a new or edit existing. So for example, if we create a new, we can select ODBC, click OK. Now let's just name it ZS ODBC 2. Okay, here you can put any username you like, and in the connection string you have to supply your DSN name. Username and passwords are ignored by ZappySys Driver anyway, so you don't have to supply it here. Okay, anyway, we will not create new one, we will use existing one, which is this. Okay, then just save it. Make sure you save every step here. Now let's go back to our mapping designer. We will create brand new mapping, post API 2. Okay, we will drag our source, we will drag our target, and then we will drag our SQL Transform. This is where whole magic happens. In SQL Transform, if you are using ZappySys Driver, you have to select ODBC. You can select all these fields and supply to here. But wait, what we will do, we actually going to convert some of this value into string format. So I need to use expression transform. So basically I'm taking these field, ID field, name, and maybe this and this. Let's just take all this. Out of these, some of the fields I want in SQL in a string format. So for example, ID I need to use in a string format. So I will convert and name it like this, string, find this, and we will use two-character function. Sure it's valid, yes. And then you will do same thing for date, because we have to supply date in a very specific format as per our API specification. Again, this is totally optional step. If your API doesn't need this way, you don't have to do this. But yeah, change this to string because we need output in string. And then let's use two-char function. And then I'm going to format it like this. YYYY If you don't do this, then default format is as per your environment, which is could be mm/dd/yyyy and then timestamp. Okay, apply. Okay, all right, so let's take these fields and then map it. So I'm going to ID, name, string, and nodes. As you see, all input have corresponding outputs. Okay, all right. So here what we need to do is we need to go to SQL port, and then we need to define our SQL query. So to make things easier, I already have defined my SQL query here. I'm just going to copy it. Basically here I am saying these two fields I want from my response, and we definitely talk about that in the previous part, that how to create your query and save metadata. And then here I'm putting my URL, then I'm passing some parameter through URL, I'm also passing body, and then I'm putting my metadata file. This is my very important step. As you also notice, I'm substituting some of the parameters, right? So there are two ways to do this, is one through binding and one through string substitution. Now if you don't have string column, then it may not appear in this substitution, which is definitely we want to do it. We don't want to use bindings because there are some known issues with binding, so we are using just a substitution. It is tilde, then your parameter, your name, and then tilde again. Like if you double click it, you will see it's appending it here like that, right? So just id underscore str, I'm using name, id underscore str, birth date underscore str, and notes. So notice how we are using this little format here for notes. We are using function called JSON encoding, and it's in the two brackets like this. Okay, now you don't have to do this, but if you have a special character which may create invalid JSON, like a tab character, new lines, double quote, single quote, then you might want to consider this thing. This is special functions provided in JSON driver. Okay, now if I click OK, alright, so now we mistyped something here. It should be S lowercase. There you go. So that's all about our inputs, creating our SQL query to form a proper JSON, right, as you see here through body. And now I need to supply my output ports. Basically we're expecting two fields, origin and URL, as per our query, as you see here, right? They both are string for sure, so I will just do 200 for now. Oh, okay. Okay, and apply. So we're going to just map this one for now. Okay, let's make it a little bigger. Okay, and then we can maybe map some other things like error, ID, okay, and so on. Okay, maybe name and birth date. Okay, now save our workflow, mapping, and as you see it's valid. Great. Now let's go back to our workflow designer. We're going to create a new workflow. Let's call it WFM2. Okay, and let's just drag session task and choose our mapping we created. Let's just connect this thing. Now here I want to make few things. I want to first change this thing stop on error 1, so that way we detect all the errors right away. Okay. And then I will go to our mapping tab and define correct things like a file path. So here I have source directory demo / API post, and looks like this is wrong. It should be source.txt. Okay, and then make sure we have all this fields are correct. Yep, they look good. And then we go to target, do the same thing. Output directory C : demo. Okay. Target.txt. Right? Okay, let's just leave everything else as is for now. Now, third thing is this our SQL Transform, very important one. Here, as we defined earlier, we need to use our ODBC connection manager. Okay, and that's it. Save it and hope we did everything right. And here we are still capturing our output. So let's go back to workflow and execute it. Alrighty. So yep, we got 3 rows and 3 rows transferred. Good. So let's look at our fiddler is still empty. Now you might be wondering why it was capturing before. Well, let me show you a little trick here. Sometimes it may not go through proxy, and what I typically do is I go to the DSN and I just make sure we have used proxy properly. Well, to use proxy, there is no direct property here, so you might have to use HTTP option. You can put any URL you like, because the URL we are overriding through SQL query anyway. And then go to proxy, enable this. :8888. That's the default port for Fiddler. 127.0.0.1 :8888. That's it. Once you do that and we rerun this thing, it should show up in our Fiddler. So give it a second. As you see, 3 requests sent, 3 records might have created. Okay. Alright, so look at these few things. Our tab character got escaped correctly. This is the single quote correctly, and JSON is perfect. You can see JSON body in a formatted way. There you go. So that's the first request, second request, third request, and that's it. That's how you can post any data to your REST API in JSON format. You can use same technique for sending data to XML SOAP request. Welcome back. So in our previous section we saw how to post data to REST API in JSON format, but the problem we may face is depending on the size of data. So for example, on SQL Transform we had a body and we generated this JSON using dynamic approach. This is fine if you have few attributes, but what if you have many attributes, you have long JSON? So to make that simpler, we provide another approach where you can supply content from a file. Yes, that's correct. So for example, you can say my file.json like this, and it should read your content from file and supply that as a body. So how do you do that? Well, let's look at simple option here. So if I go to my DSN we created earlier, click configure. Here we have an option called file upload / multipart. If you check that, you may notice we talk about two different type of uploads: raw upload and the multipart form upload. For this purpose we will only use raw upload. In raw upload, all you do is check this option and then supply your file path with @ symbol before the path. Okay, so that's it. So if I know my file path, I can simply say @ my file path like this. And if I do, let's see what happens. If I go back to my fiddler, I click test, it's going to probably call my API, and voila, it actually submitted my file content as body. So that's exactly what we want, right? So for this, what you have to do, click generate SQL and take this one attribute here, is multipart equal to true. That's what we'll use to do this magic. Okay, so I have actually created this query which I really like to use. I will go back, put it here. Now, you know, just make sure if you're doing with the path like this, see what happens. If I save it, oh wait, that's not right. So you need to supply your slash with double slash. That's first thing, like this. And one thing I have found which is problematic is if you have a slash and then tilde sign, it may not like it. See what happens. Okay, so to overcome this problem, we actually going to supply our body through different mechanism, right? So essentially body is our file path, and I'm going to generate my file path here. Output. So here we don't have to worry about escaping, hopefully. Just see. And then I can use my ID input field like this and craft my file path. Success. Alright. Now we use this file path as our input somewhere. Oh no, we don't want to do that. So you drag maybe somewhere bottom. That's it. Good. Now here, come back and carefully place your cursor after @ sign and double click on file path. Oh, still it's doing this little thing. Okay, so I may have to body and put it after @. Now this should definitely fix our file path. Let's see. So save this thing. Now go back. Let's enable our fiddler and execute our workflow. Okay, failed. Let's look at see what happens. Session. So error. Okay, so something wrong with the file path C:/dem no one dot. Okay, so it did not find dot in the name. Let's just confirm we did that correct way. Okay, it was here on the expression. Yep, we forgot the dot. It's a good way to troubleshoot. Let's see, click OK. Let's save this thing and let's just run one more time. Restart. Okay, something is coming. Alright, as you see this, it sent 3 different requests from 3 different files, and that's pretty much it. Okay, thank you for watching, and hopefully you can make some progress by looking at this video. Thank you.